I'm going to start very much on home turf, so talk about the property market, and then I'll drift a little bit into non-property topics. So you won't see a daft logo here. It's me kind of speaking as an economist with an economist's hat on, rather than a daft spokesperson giving any prognoses about the property market, just to keep the estate agents happy. What I hope to do today over the next 20 minutes or so is have a quick look at the latest trends in the property market. It'll probably be relatively familiar news. You'll be able to guess certainly the direction, and maybe you probably have a good idea of the size as well of the falls. And then maybe take a step back and take a look at some of the higher level trends. Look at the last 10 to 20 to 30 years. See what we can tell from the data we do have from Census or from CSO, from the Department of the Environment. See what implications there are based on what we know about borrowings, about negative equity as well, and see what kind of issues are thrown up by what we're seeing in some of the data at the moment. And then, as I say, go off into one or two tangents which are of relevance for today in terms of the challenges the economy faces, particularly with respect to NAMA, and then I'll shut up. So this is the change in asking prices over the last 3.5 years or so. This is quarter on quarter, so kind of like a relatively current rate of change in the property market. And you can see there was the good old days. I have a pointer, I can point at things. There was the good old days, almost an 8% rise in the second quarter of 2006 compared to just 3 months beforehand. So this was, I don't know if any of you saw the TV3 programme last night, More Money Than Sense. This was the height of the More Money Than Sense days. You could literally sit in a property and make a whole lot of money out of it. Now, around the start of 2007, asking prices went static. And since then, for the whole course of 2007 and 2008, it was getting worse and worse in terms of the quarter and quarter falls. So you can see there by the end of 2008, you had an almost 6% fall based on the season beforehand, or compared to the season beforehand. Now, you've got a kind of an inkling maybe things are going to level off in the first quarter of 2009, but the second quarter of 2009 has come back with a bang, and the next report will be out in a couple of weeks' time. That will show us everything up to the end of September. It'll be interesting to see whether we see yet another fall of around 5%, or whether we maybe see things start to level off. Although if many more estates in Kilkenny start selling for $1 million, maybe it'll be down for a little while yet. So that's just what we're measuring with the asking prices on the site. So we would track tens of thousands of properties that come on the site, track them in real time, track the price then. Also, if someone changes the price, if they did say 650,000 and they're now down to 500,000, that goes in as an entry as well, because really all this captures is sellers' expectations. It's not capturing the actual closing price. We don't have that information. The best we have, and I'll come on to it in a couple of minutes, the best we have is some lender information based on permanent TSB figures. So there's a couple of headlines. I think these slides will probably be made available or sent around, so you can have a look through those in terms of what's going on. Some regional tidbits as well, which generally don't get as much coverage, so you might be interested. Dublin has actually fallen faster, earlier and faster and harder so far than the rest of the country. And Dublin city centre prices by end of June were over a third below, asking prices were over a third below where they were at the peak in early 2007. Now, if you think to yourself, based on your own experiences and acquaintances, if you put up a house price, if you put up a house for sale now and you have an asking price, I would think that it's reasonable to assume you're going to sell for 5 or 10% below that on average. Obviously, some people are going to price quite low, but the average person is going to end up having to take 5 or 10% less. So that would mean you're talking 40 to 45% down so far in Dublin city centre. The equivalent for some of the other areas is about 20%. So again, you can add in an extra 5%. But you can see there's quite a significant degree of variation around the country. And actually, the slowest falling county, I think it's Kerry. It's in Munster anyway. Kerry or Tipperary. And that's been less than half. It's seen less than half of the fall in Dublin city centre so far. So there's quite a spread. And it says to me that house prices, the falls in house prices at the moment, are not being driven by long-term fundamental factors. They're being driven by short-term confidence factors, or lack of confidence at the moment. Because the degree of over-construction of property over the last 5 or 6 years was significantly greater in places like Connacht and Ulster than it was in places like Dublin. And yet they're seeing significantly smaller falls in house prices. And that suggests to me that if you think of your elementary first-time buyer home being driven entirely by how much wages, how much in wages do I have, what are the interest rates, how much is the bank going to allow me to borrow, the other end of the housing market is your 3 million plus mansion somewhere in South County Dublin, and that's being driven by what the prospective buyer thinks the property is going to be worth in 5 years' time. It's not being driven by narrow concerns like interest rates and how much are we going to be able to afford. Obviously, to a certain extent it is. But in a relative sense, we have that spectrum from interest rates and wages all the way through to confidence about what Ireland's going to be like in 5 or 10 years' time. It's that end of the market that's being hit hardest at the moment. And if we all think back to what we thought 2012 or 2020 was going to look like for Ireland, what were our perceptions like in 2006 and compare them to what they are now, that gives you some idea of how things have been readjusted. So I mentioned that this is based purely on asking prices, and the more standard measure up until a couple of years ago was certainly to use whatever closing prices we had. What we have is a series calculated by the ESRI based on permanent TSB data. But the problem is the volume of transactions, as you can imagine. The Irish Bankers Federation will tell you just what the thinness on the market. Lending in the second quarter of the year was down 60-something% based on the year beforehand. And even if permanent TSB keeps its market share constant in that and still does a fifth of all mortgages, it doesn't have the volume of data required to be able to give a true reflection of the falls in house prices. And an indication of that is the fact that they have to stop 2 of their sub-indices, one of which is 3-bed semi-D and another of which is commuter counties. And if you stop doing those, what do you have in there? And that's not a criticism of the methodology, it's just a criticism of it's not even a criticism, it's a comment on the level of data that they can work with. So you can see the red line here is closing prices. And for a while, and it would be right to do so at the start, the closing prices were falling faster than the asking prices, as people were having to deal with getting less than they expected. What we're seeing now, though, is that the closing prices measure is stuck at minus 10% year on year, more or less, although in the last month or two it's gone up. Whereas asking prices were static and are now falling at 20% in year on year terms. So asking prices look to be below closing prices, but we know from anecdote, if that's good enough, that if you put up a house, you're going to get below the asking price. So there's some issue there with the level of data. And it's obviously up for people, obviously I'm going to say one thing, it's up for people for themselves to make up their own minds about what's the best signal at the moment with the current type of property market. And this isn't even, asking prices are obviously not perfect, but it may be the best one we have. Some people say, well, okay, asking prices, at the end of the day, you're, even with the best will in the world, Ronan, you're probably peddling some kind of message somewhere. You don't want to upset someone. What about the level of properties? You can't hide that. Obviously, I could conceivably hide stuff in my econometric regressions and leave out properties I didn't like, and come up with the results if I wanted to. Hopefully, you believe I don't do that, or you don't believe I do that. I'm not sure which. But I can't hide. Anyone can go on every hour and record the number of properties for sale. And the number of properties for sale on the site increased dramatically over the course of 2006 and 2007. And the problem with just extrapolating from that is that in 2006 at least, there was a huge sales effort on the part of the website to bring in a whole lot of new estate agents. So you have to kind of correct for that by looking at a basket of estate agents over the period of time to kind of strip out that effect. And the graph here shows that graph at least from the start of 2007. I wouldn't want to give figures before that just in case. But you can see that we had somewhere between 20 and 30,000 properties for sale in the early part of 2007, back when properties were probably flipping over every 2 or 3 months. And that's gone up to above 60,000. So Davy have done some calculations and they estimate that that's about 19 months supply of second-hand alone. And this is being driven predominantly by second-hand because new builds tend not to put up the full level of supply that they have. They'll put up 3-bed for sale when they actually maybe have 10 or 20 or 50 3-beds for sale. So this is being driven by second hands.